On an unassuming path in the jungles of Guyana, there was a small town called Jonestown. On November 18th, 1978, in this town, 909 people simultaneously dropped dead of cyanide poisoning. This was not the doing of a serial killer or a mass murderer. This was a mass suicide. Who could possibly convince 909 people to kill themselves? The culprit was Jim Jones, a self-proclaimed preacher and leader of the People's Temple. Jonestown, also known as the People's Temple Agricultural Project, was comprised entirely of Jones's followers. But who was Jim Jones? How did he do all this? Jones was a charismatic, religious figure who regarded Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Vladimir Lenin, and Mao Zedong as heroes. Evidently, he was not the man he seemed. As an outsider looking into Jones's leadership of the People's Temple, their influence was very clear. He merged Marxism, communism, socialism, and Christianity to create his own blend of ideologies. Jones didn't preach to spark revolutionary ideas in the minds of his followers. He focused on ideals of hopelessness and oppression. Rather than lead his followers to believe that there was any chance of success under capitalism in the United States, he taught them that there was no escape from its evils. Despite this perceived hopelessness, however, Jones marketed himself as a religious savior. There was even a time where at one of his meetings he was able to make a wheelchair-bound woman walk again. Sound fishy? Little did the other cult members know. This woman was just a secretary who was hired for the bit. Jones encouraged his followers to be perfect like God, and perfect like himself. Jones was not subtle about the things he wanted, but still, there was no predicting the lengths he would go to feed his superiority complex, and to save his followers in a revolutionary sacrifice against capitalism. Whether the citizens of the commune were aware of it or not, they were being held hostage, but their loved ones back in the States weren't so deluded by Jim Jones. Family members and friends protested for the government to free the people in Jonestown, and eventually the government obeyed and sent Leo Ryan, a California government official, and some reporters to survey the situation. Jim Jones forced his members to put on a beautiful performance for these representatives. Ryan was met with a sight of people dancing, having a wonderful time, and thought that people could leave at any time they liked. It looked like a wonderful community, but it was all a performance. However, some members of the cult conveyed their struggles to Ryan, despite Jones's strict regulations about communication. Ryan was sympathetic to their struggles and attempted to bring some members of the cult back to the United States. However, during their departure, this crew was ambushed by gunmen sent by Jones, killing Ryan and some of the reporters. This marked the first lives claimed by Jim Jones's power-fueled delusions. In a matter Karl Marx definitely wouldn't approve of, followers were subjected to intense physical labor in the harsh heat for the entire day. They were woken up by guards at 6 a.m., fed bug-infested rice and milk, and forced to work until nightfall. After that, they were then made to attend mandatory meetings of Jones preaching for hours on end, sowing fear of the world outside the camp, and describing the weaponry he had to counter any opposition that faced him. If followers were caught falling asleep during these meetings that went well into the middle of the night, they'd be beaten with a cane. The loyalty of his subjects was constantly tested, primarily in the most brutal of his meetings, the White Nights. During these meetings, members were forced to drink a fruit punch that may or may not be poisoned, which was a terrifying test of fate for members, but a mere rehearsal for Jones. Members of the cult had their passports confiscated and were fed constant information about the horrors of the Guyana jungle, and how their situation was truly inescapable, so they were forced to adapt and praise Jones. However, there were a few survivors of Jones's murderous rampages, namely, a few who made it to the Port Kaituma airstrip with Senator Ryan. Some of the members were able to escape into the jungle and survive, despite the fear of it Jones so often drilled into their heads. The White Nights kept increasing in stakes, until finally, November 18th, 1978 came around. This was the day that Jones's practice from the White Nights would come to fruition. Jones had been stocking up on a Kool-Aid-like drink called Flavor Aid, and when the time came he mixed it all with cyanide. At 4:30, citizens of Jonestown were corralled by armed guards. Jones told his followers that an army was coming to torture them, and he was saving them with a process he coined revolutionary suicide.
We are not committing suicide. It's a revolutionary act.
He presented the people with the poison flavor aid mixture and told them to drink it. Some members tried to leave, but Jones didn't allow them to. These members were held at gunpoint until they drank the flavor aid mixture. Children were given the laced drink first, so parents felt as if they had nothing to live for and were less likely to resist. Those who did try to resist were forcibly injected with cyanide through hypodermic needles. This entire meeting was captured in an audio tape, with the first 20 minutes of the tape being of Jones preaching to his followers to die with dignity for their cause.
Without me, life has no meaning. I'm the best friend you'll ever have. Death is not a fearful thing. It's living that's treacherous.
This is followed by a period of crying, and eventually complete silence for the rest of the tape, as the cyanide took effect. After the massacre, Jones likely instructed somebody to shoot him, or did it himself, with his death being labeled a suicide. The U.S. military was forced to clean the site within a week, which was especially difficult due to the advanced stages of decomposition the bodies were in, due to the Guyana heat. Some of those who did escape turned to violence, with both domestic abuse and public shootings being performed by these victims. Luckily, not every survivor turned to violence. Most notably, Tracy Parks, who was one of the children who escaped into the forest at the airstrip, has devoted her life to avenging those massacred at Jonestown, and speaks out about the event, so as not to let Jones win.